Canada event done in partnership with Indigenous Works. If you don't know about Pride at Work Canada already, through dialogue, education, and thought leadership, we empower employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We help create safer, more inclusive workplaces that realize the full potential of all employees and bring down barriers to employment. Our learning, networking, and community events happen across the country, celebrating and connecting the most inclusive Canadian employers. I am Jade Pichette, the Manager of Programs at Pride at Work Canada, and I use the pronouns they and them. We are also very, very grateful to be working with Indigenous Works for this event. Indigenous Works, formerly the Aboriginal Human Resource Council, is a national social enterprise that is ISO 9001 certified quality management system. They were founded as a national nonprofit organization in 1998 as a recommendation from the 1996 report on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples with the mandate to improve the inclusion and engagement of Indigenous people in the Canadian economy. We are very grateful that they are working with us today, and you'll get to hear more from them during the program. We also want to say a big thank you to our sponsor today, Bell Media, where they don't just accept difference, they celebrate it. We're very grateful that they came on as a sponsor for this event, prioritizing and making known both Indigenous Peoples History Month as well as Pride Month. We know we have many people from Bell with us today. With any of our events, we like to do a land acknowledgement. Pride at Work Canada works on the traditional territories of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people. We recognize that there are multiple barriers that impact Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people from accessing meaningful, affirming, and inclusive employment. In our work, we look to reduce those barriers and are open to feedback from Indigenous workers, employers, and job seekers in making that a reality. So in other words, please feel free to hold us accountable. We want to be a space that Indigenous, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQ workers can see themselves and not just be included, but have a sense of belonging. In particular, Pride at Work Canada's office is on the Dish with One Spoon territory, known as Takaranto or Toronto. It's traditionally home of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and of the Mississaugas and the New Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and as somebody of mostly white settler descent, it is always important for me to be engaging in decolonization work, both internally as well as in the work that I do. We also today want to honor the roots of Pride. The roots of Pride come from a resistance to police, governmental, and societal discrimination. Many of the founders of today's Pride movement were Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and people of color. Pride at Work Canada stands in solidarity with Black communities in resisting police violence and in creating more inclusive spaces for all Canadians. We also know that homophobia and transphobia is entirely linked to colonization. And those of us who are settlers, who are on this call and elsewhere, must work to support Indigenous resurgence and address the ongoing, including police violence and discrimination against Indigenous people. This photo is from a protest that happened here in Toronto after the death of Regis Corinchi Paquette, who was a Black Indigenous woman. In terms of today's agenda, we will have remarks from Albert Mcleod, and then from our friends at Indigenous Works, including Patricia Baxter and Kelly Lendsay. And then we'll move into our panel on Two-Spirit inclusion in the workplace and conclude with some resources that you can take away today. We have closed captioning available in English and French, thanks to AI Media. So please feel free to use the links. They are next to the chat. And for the panel, we won't be able to answer all the questions. So for others, please email info@prideatwork.ca, and please keep the chat an inclusive space, and happy Pride. But to start today, I would like to introduce Albert Mcleod. Albert Mcleod is a status Indian with ancestry from Nisquayaasik Cree Nation and the Métis community of Norway House in northern Manitoba. He has over 30 years of experience as a human rights activist and is one of the directors of the Two-Spirited People of Manitoba. Albert began his Two-Spirit advocacy in Winnipeg in 1986 and became an HIV activist in 1987. He was the director of the Manitoba Aboriginal AIDS Task Force from 1991 to 2001, and in 2018, Albert received an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Winnipeg. Albert lives in Winnipeg, where he works as a consultant specializing in Indigenous people, cultural reclamation, and cross-cultural training. We're so grateful to have Albert with us today. He was going to join us at actually one of our in-person ProPride events, which obviously did not happen, so we're very grateful that he was able to join us with this event.
Thanks, Jade, and really grateful to be part of this session today, and as well as the panelists that are involved. I grew up in a small northern town and came out quite early as a gay youth, and that really affected the trajectory of my life, in that being gay in a northern high school really affected my education, and I left school in grade 10, and that really affected my employability throughout my life. But I've been fortunate in my life to be able to sort of find employment as an out Two-Spirit person and continue to do so today. But I really encourage the work that your initiative is undertaking, and we need to really look at the TRCs, the Truth and Reconciliation's 94 calls to action, and the recent 231 calls to justice by the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. And these are national Canadian initiatives that really give us a guideline or a roadmap for all Canadians to begin to improve relations with Indigenous people. I know there's a lot of challenges for Indigenous LGBT people today as they sort of navigate the education system that potentially would lead to a good career and employment opportunity. And, we have to think about that, for LGBT children who know their identity very young, that really is in a school environment. So if there are trans children in school who want to, affirm their identity, that's where it begins. And really it's that trajectory into middle school, high school, and potentially university and a career. In Manitoba, we had the opportunity to work with the University of Winnipeg on a call to conversation about how to make institutions like universities safer for Two-Spirit and queer trans people of color, because again, these are older colonial systems that are sort of, designed, for one population. And so we wanted to open up the conversation about how can we make these spaces more safer so that people can, choose a career path, get education and graduate from high school or from university and really explore a career. I like to say to you today, have you ever thought about being an astronaut? And I know that sounds, far-fetched, but if we don't have those kind of visions or dreams to begin with, we're really not going to achieve our goals. So we really need to be thinking, outside the box and really encouraging Two-Spirit people to, reach for the stars and to overcome the barriers, whether they're systemic or colonial or racism barriers to achieve what their dreams are. We have a lot of Two-Spirit youth in rural, on-reserve, northern and remote communities who have these dreams. And I think as a society, it's up to us to help them ensure that these dreams are achieved in a wealthy country like Canada. Some of the issues I think with Two-Spirit people in the workplace are about people, anti-racism training I think is very important. LGBTQ awareness and training for staff is also important, especially in Indigenous organizations that are potential hirers of Two-Spirit people. And then the other piece is the cultural component, in that we know that people have some very rigid ideas about the inclusion of trans women or trans men or gay men and lesbian Indigenous people in ceremonies that are still very constructed on the binary gender. So we need to really consider, because cultural programming is a part of people's employment today in Indigenous organizations or in university institutions. So really it's addressing those issues of knowledge and creating safer spaces. I just want to acknowledge historically, the Two-Spirit movement began in North America in 1975 when Randy Burns and Deborah Cameron launched Gay American Indians in San Francisco. So we have a long history, a long legacy that begins 45 years ago. And we really need to acknowledge those leaders who sort of laid the path for us. Because that path is really filled with a lot of knowledge about systems, about tradition, history, and culture. And so I'm really grateful to be part of today and to listen to the panelists talk about, their perspective, their advice, and their personal lived experiences.
Albert. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Albert. I'm really hearing the importance of both training, but also providing space so that people can see themselves and see the possibilities that are coming. And I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today and kind of share that knowledge and also that history, because I think a lot of people think that Two-Spirit organizing is something that's new. And it really isn't. It goes back to the 70s. So I'm very grateful for that share. So after Albert, we have our friends from Indigenous Works, Patricia Baxter and Kelly Lendsay. So Patricia Baxter specializes in organizational development, facilitation, and training with Indigenous people across Canada. Her efforts include major facilitations at national forums and roundtables, working on women's issues in the areas of economic development, as well as participating as a board member of Indigenous Works since its inception. For several years, she has acted as co-chair of this organization, and Pat continues to work at the community, regional, and national level on Indigenous issues. She is the past co-president of the Canadian Women's Foundation and worked with the Women's Economic Development Consortium. These activities led to the establishment of a bursary at Trent University, Patricia Baxter Anishinaabe Kwe Award. Since 1994, Pat has been self-employed, working with a variety of clients, both in the public/private sectors and nonprofit organizations across Canada. She volunteers with several national and regional organizations in Canada. Pat enjoys working on human resource development work, capacity, and organizational development work. Patricia is a member of the Chigana First Nation and lives in Alberta, Quebec. Kelly Lendsay is a social entrepreneur who is internationally recognized as one of Canada's foremost innovators and organizational development experts in workplace models, corporate/Indigenous partnerships, and Indigenous inclusion strategies. His dynamic communication style and social entrepreneurial success has earned him the reputation as an engaging thought leader and effective bridge builder, fostering trusted partnerships for workforce and economic development across Canada and abroad. A proud Canadian Indigenous leader of Cree and Métis ancestry, he moved seamlessly between both worlds, fostering economic inclusion, well-being, and prosperity for Canada. He was honored by the University of Saskatchewan as one of their 100 alumni of influence in their last century, whose accomplishments have been recognized for influencing the growth and development of the university, the province, and the world during the last century. Welcome, Patricia and Kelly.
Thank you, Jade. It's an honor to be here today and to be with. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you turn on your video for us as well?
Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone across Canada. What an exciting event to be part of. It's just phenomenal to see up to 1,000 participants today to this very important dialogue that we're having. Maybe one of the first time it's ever happened in Canada as well. So it's an honor for Indigenous Works, and in particular myself, who has very close ties to the LGBTQ 2S community personally. So when our CEO, Kelly, asked me to get involved in this, I didn't hesitate for a second. I would also like to just open by saying I'd like to thank the Algonquin Territory for, this is where I reside, for the use of their land and for their culture as we work today. I'd also like to do a little nod out to our Quebecois, where I'm also from. It's Jean Baptiste, so congratulations on that for people who live in Quebec. It's a holiday here, by the way. So you've heard a little bit about myself. I don't think that you need to hear any more about me, but you may want to hear a little bit more about who Indigenous Works is. We're an organization that, as Jade indicated, really came out of the World Commission of Aboriginal People, which was published about 30 years ago. And our organization is about 22 years old. And we have tried to respond to the growing and different interests of Indigenous people entering into the workforce. And it could be a wide range of things, from training to preparing employers, in other words, the environment, to including Indigenous people, prepping Indigenous people for those workplaces. And now also we've developed a number of tools and applications and resources for employers who are looking to ensure that their environments are inclusive and are participatory of Indigenous people. So those tools can go anything from assessments to doing training specifically in communities to providing direct resources and consulting advice on a wide range of issues. We're now launching into a much needed area where there's a lack of research that has to do with Indigenous people and how, what kinds of things employers need to know on how to proceed in preparing their workplace. So that research is starting to work with companies and with Indigenous organizations who are primarily working in economic development fields. So small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and large businesses, I shouldn't say, I mean everyone's included, in doing this research that will help to guide the kinds of work and responses that we need to do as a service provider, as an organization, and an advocate on these issues, as well as helping employers becoming an employer of choice. So that will be done through certification, it will be done through membership to our organization, through the leadership circle, and a wide range of other issues. So Kelly will probably talk a little bit more about that. Our effort today and our interest today is ensuring that the LGBTQ TS is well represented. We think that there are very many types of connections that can be made between our community and the LGBTQ community. And we understand the frustrations, the concerns, the fear that have in particular arisen in just the last few weeks during the Black Matters issue. And but one of the ways that we've been doing it through Indigenous Works is through cultural safety. And as Albert mentioned earlier in his remarks, cultural safety and cultural competency is a critical component for employers to embrace and to conduct on a regular basis. Cultural safety, cultural competency, I think as Albert alluded, doesn't come with one workshop or one show of a video. It's not just a check mark. It means that it's an ongoing, lifelong commitment and education to cultural safety and to cultural competency. It goes beyond health and safety. It means that we need to be not only tolerant, but we need to become educators to one another and try to avoid being too frustrated with some of the difficult questions that we all get asked, difficult assumptions and stereotyping that occur, because it'll only happen if we really put ourselves, into a place of I'm just trying to stop my phone here. Of course, it's not going to stop. So the putting ourselves into a place of oh dear, I've just lost my train of thought here. As educators and as people who can really help to guide this discussion and motivate people to keep learning. And I think that that's probably a very similar goal and situation that the LGBTQ TS community is also interested in. So through Indigenous Works, we'll continue to work on some of these efforts. There are other efforts I'm sure that we'll learn about today that we should be addressing and we should be embracing as a national organization as well. We look forward to this conversation, and I look forward to the dialogue. Mcleod.
Thank you, Pat, and welcome everybody. It's Kelly Lendsay, CEO of Indigenous Works, and great to partner with Pride at Work Canada, and to Jade, a special shout out. It's been great working with her. I also want to do a shout out to Bell. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. I'm speaking to you from the Treaty 6 and Métis homeland of Saskatchewan today, and the synergies between Pride at Work and Indigenous Works are in alignment. We're both about inclusion in the workplace. And over the last 22 years, our work has been focused on workplace inclusion strategies. We've developed a 7-stage model called the Inclusion Continuum that you can download from our website. And it's really about how do you benchmark the strategies and the practices of effective employers and organizations. And then you can also get into how do you develop the cultural competencies of people and managers and teams. So that's been our work. We continue, as Pat said, we're doing more and more research in this area. There's lots of work being done on engagement and engagement factors that drive companies and teams. And don't forget, the #1 engagement factor that has never changed, the #1 is I want to feel included. Continues to be, I think, the key objective of all workplaces is to really create that power of inclusion strategies. So Albert, thank you to you for being our MC. I know we're going to have a great day. You took us back to the 70s. We know that the Two-Spirited go back hundreds and indeed thousands of years. And so it's in part of different societies and clans and Indigenous ways of thinking and knowing. And I'm just so very excited about the panelists that have been assembled today. It's going to be a dynamic discussion. Enjoy, and thank you very much to our partners, Pride at Work Canada. Mcleod.
hopefully we can see this more in future. So next, we get to the panel. This is the really exciting piece. We have a wonderful moderator for you today, being Gabe Castillo, who is Nij Manitoba, or Two-Spirit, Mi'kmaq, Algonquin, Scottish, and French Canadian. They currently thrive in Cree, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Treaty 6 territory, also known as Edmonton. Gabe is actively involved in several different forms of traditional Indigenous culture and ceremony as a drummer and a grass and buffalo dancer, and proudly celebrates a drug and alcohol-free life. Gabe is a first-time author in Love After the End by Arsenal Pulp Press, third place short story contest winner in 2019 with the Prairie Fire, and first place short story contest winner in 2019 with Fire in Historica Canada in conjunction with the Governor General Awards for Indigenous Arts and Stories. They are the second place champion of the Canadian National Slam Poetry Competition. I actually didn't know that one. And Gabe has also been chosen to represent the Two-Spirit community as Mr. Two-Spirit International 2019-2020 and as the treasurer of the board of directors of the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. Gabe has previously been one of our webinar presenters talking about Indigenous gender diversity in the workplace, and we're very grateful to have you with us today. So take it away, Gabe.
Hi, Kwekakina, Kweshaba. Good morning. It is still morning for me over on the west side of the prairies. I'm very honored to be here with all of you today. I am originally from Kitchissippi, unceded Algonquin territory, colonially known as Ottawa. My family is all from there, and being in Edmonton has been absolutely incredible. There is a lot happening over here with Two-Spirit resurgence, events, programming. So it's been something really beautiful to see a lot of workplaces actually have, you know, Two-Spirit coordinators as job positions and job titles. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our incredible panelists for today. So what I'll do is I'll read their bios, and then I'll let them introduce themselves, and then I'll go on to the next panelist. So first up, we have Gregory John. Pronouns are he, him. So Gregory John is a proud Métis man from Calgary, Alberta, who has spent his career in energy and worked as an advocate for both his LGBTQ2+ and Indigenous communities. He is the founder of Canada's only Pride celebration, where both police and military are welcome in their uniforms, and founder of Canada's first Rural Gay-Straight Alliance Summit, which was held in Strathmore, Alberta in October of 2018. He takes every opportunity to celebrate his intersectionality. He has had the chance to speak across Canada and the world and share his story and expertise. Thank you so much for being with us today, Gregory.
Gregory John. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I've got to say, I've never been more nervous of being in my own house in front of 470 other people. So, you know, I really think that this is such an important conversation, and it's timed perfectly for where we are in society. And I am really looking forward to, you know, sharing my story as somebody who has decided to make a career in oil and gas and energy, and have worked with between 80 and 100 different First Nations in discussing what economic development looks like for communities who have not necessarily had that opportunity. Now, I do want to preface it with a little bit of, I'm not here to defend oil and gas. I'm here to share my own story from where I started in 2008 as a part of the industry to where we are today. And I really believe that we've come such a long way, and that story needs to be told and from an understanding that as an Indigenous LGBTQ2+ member of the energy industry, it's important for us to help guide the way and shape this industry the way we want to see it. So I look forward to the conversation.
Chimiigwech, thank you so much, Gregory. Next up, we have Jarret Leaman, is Anishinaabe Ojibwe from Mcleod First Nation. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration, specializing in human resource management with a minor degree in Native Studies from Trent University and a master's degree in industrial relations through the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University. Jarret was awarded the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers for his work in the Indigenous and LGBTQ2S communities. Jarret is currently the Director of Business Development and Philanthropy for Troon Technologies and the founder of the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Technology. Jarret is also a successful entrepreneur with his business Ayabi Management, where he works with Indigenous talent in the entertainment industry. Previously, Jarret was the Senior Administrative Officer at the Aboriginal Institutes Consortium, and prior to that, Jarret was the Executive Director of the Aboriginal Professional Association of Canada. Jarret specializes in diversity and inclusion, labor market readiness, entrepreneurship, nonprofit management, Aboriginal engagement and policy development, and has worked with several large organizations in the energy, resource, and educational sectors, and is highly involved within the Aboriginal community in Toronto. So happy to have us with you today, Jarret.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yeah. So I just wanted to say thanks for having me, and I'm really I've been really impressed with what I've been hearing and really excited to be having this conversation, and coming to you from Toronto.
Amazing. Chimiigwech, thank you, Jarret. And then next up we have Saylesh Wesley, is Saulo, and I have it here, Tsinchuyan, who graduated from UBC's Native Indigenous Teacher Education Program, or NITEP, in May of 1999. She taught with the Vancouver School District from 2000 to 2008 in both enrolling and non-enrolling support teaching positions. She completed her Master's in Education in 2009 from UBC in the 2007 Urban Learning cohort. She has taught in many levels, institutions, and now works for the Chilliwack School District. Her passion as an educator is within the fields of Indigenous and LGBTQ two-spirit education. Her philosophy of teaching says that teaching is spiritual and sacred work. It is not simply a career for performers and academics. That's beautiful. Would you like to say a few words, Saylesh?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Well, I think the bio said everything that I probably would have said. My mother is Stalo. Her father is the Musqueam, and her mother is Stalo. My father is Tsimshian from Port Essington, and now he lives with the Kitsim-Kalim First Nation. I've been involved heavily with a lot of two-spirited work and activism since approximately 1995. So it's been quite a journey from that time. It feels like a few years ago, but here we all are, and I see the same faces. It's so wonderful to see the people that I've mixed with in the past. Wonderful to be here.
And towards the end, for questions through the chat, I believe. So this first question I have is for all three of you. So we'll just keep going in the order that I introduced you as. What are some of the challenges for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ Indigenous people from accessing meaningful and affirming employment in Canada? So what are challenges that we face in accessing employment?
So I'm going to share some of the things that have been directly said to me in just the last few years as an illustration of some of the challenges we still face. You talk like a woman. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have hired somebody like you. Métis are just out to steal First Nations rights. Don't use your gifted title, which was gifted apparently. At the time it was the vice president's role, to air my gay angst. So this shows the attitudes towards people that are a little different. But what I think in general, that there needs to be an awareness that the perspectives I hold as a gay Métis man brings an added level of empathy to business decisions. And it's a business tool. It's a risk mitigation tool that if I'm to talk in a business language, that's what it is. But, I think what people look at is, the things that makes us different, not at what makes me of value. And it's crazy to think that, within, that those comments happened actually last summer. So, we have a long way to go in terms of addressing some of these challenges, but I think what is required is, panels like this to show that, the likes of Saylesh, Jarret, and myself bring added perspective that is different than being just Indigenous or just a member of the LGBTQ community.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I think I have seen with employment in general is starting with it being Indigenous itself, and then when we are in a workplace that doesn't understand the identity of and the meaning of two-spiritedness, is then a further complication in the workplace. I always often joke in my volunteer work and in my work in around the Toronto community, in the LGBT spaces in Toronto, that I'm sort of the elusive 2S, which quite often gets forgotten at the end of the acronyms, and then if it is added, there still isn't an understanding about what it actually means, and so I think for me it is around a constant work that I have to do around explaining what two-spirited is from my perspective and from my teachings. I don't experience overt racism habits in quite some time in being a two-spirited person, but it's because I'm in very sort of safe circles, I think, in relation to the companies and organizations that I work within. And so my work has been to go out and explain and talk about my identity as broadly as I can, and from my perspective. And that does include going to certain places like churches, for example. So I have spoken to some churches around what two-spiritedness means. And to me, it is a mix of spirituality mixed with sexuality, which is sometimes hard for some people to understand. And so I think that is sort of the biggest struggle, because I think there is a lot of overt racism in our workplaces, just to Indigenous people in general, and then it is compounded if you are identifying as a two-spirited individual. So I think that is sort of a little bit about my experience, but I think I agree with Gregory around, conversations like we're having today are really critical and very needed.
I think everything has been said. Thank you, Jarret and Gregory, for starting us off. I think that it's been, I don't even know how to put a finger on it. It's difficult to answer questions like that when you dwell in the margins and can't even see what's happening above ground. And so, like for those of us who are Indigenous, visibly Indigenous, it's one thing. So that's one margin that we're in right there, and I see a margin metaphorically like as a canal, like a ditch basically, and we're in it. So we can't see what's happening on the surface. And then for someone like myself who's trans, I get buried deeper. And so I'm in the margin of the margin, basically. And so, you know, and I don't say that with a defeatist attitude. I say that knowing that I've got more work to do than most other people. The fact that we have no privilege, very to little, like I'm in the negative with regards to privilege. I have to do the best that I can to maintain a sense of self and a sense of worth, and to do the best that I can to be participating in a very superficial, egotistical world. So it's very tricky to navigate what it means to be employed, right? I mean, and what kind of employment are we looking for, right? Do we want to go mainstream? Like myself, I'm a teacher in a public school system, and arguably one of the most political public school districts. It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. I mean, the fact that I got the position, that's another story, but continuing on with this work in the field that I'm in and in the district that I'm in, I have to tread very carefully. So not just acquiring the job, but maintaining it and walking the journey, say towards retirement or to the next job or whatever it is that we want to do, is treacherous. And so the challenges are still very much there. I had a head start on many of the other Two-Spirit people who, you know, are in a similar situation as myself, because I did transition in the 90s. So that was a time when it was not a thing the way it is now. So I just hope that the work that we're doing here and the work that, you know, I commit myself to with regards to being, you know, alive and therefore an activist, that it makes things a little bit more accessible, so that we have some steps to climb on to, you know, at least see above ground, you know, from the margins. It's not going to be just our work that helps us stand on the earth where we actually belong. We're going to actually need the support of our settler allies who have the positions to put us on the platform when they have it. So, you know, I think that these sorts of venues and these sorts of gatherings are absolutely critical for that destination.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Chimigwech, to all three of you for addressing some of these challenges. I've heard a lot of talk about that intersectionality between being both Indigenous and a part of that LGBTQ plus community, that being something that most people already struggle with addressing, either one or either of those things. I've also heard about that coming together of not just sexuality, but also spirituality, and how that's difficult for a lot of people to understand. And then I've also heard from you, Saylesh, about the fact that, you know, a lot of Two-Spirit people, you know, being in that margin and not being able to see exactly what's going on. And then also in the Two-Spirit community itself, right? we have different privileges and oppressions, and some of us who are more white passing versus those of us that are darker, or even Black Indigenous people, and then those of us that are transgender, right? As well as if we're living on reserve, or, you know, so there's lots of things going on, and that it's a big call to action for our settler allies to be there with us and to support us with that. So thank you all so much. And so next I have questions that are for the individual panelists. So we'll start off with Gregory. So you've worked in some industries that are not often known to be at the forefront of inclusion, like oil and gas. And so what advice do you have for those in these sectors to push inclusion?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I do want to put right out there is oil and gas does not operate the same way as it did 20 years ago. And I think out of necessity, it has evolved to include multiple perspectives as critical to advancing oil and gas projects, pipeline projects, etc. These are very controversial, and obviously, you know, through the efforts of these companies, but also more importantly, the efforts of the communities that are deciding whether or not these pipeline projects or oil and gas projects are right for them. We're learning at a speed that we've never learned at before. And I think we have to acknowledge that, you know, when somebody like me now has a place at an oil company and is listened to, whose perspective matters, I think we can look at how to continue to push that. And I think, you know, I think one of the most important turning points in my career was I was talking at a panel on corporate social responsibility, and what it kind of turned into was, you know, a corporate, you know, them patting themselves on the back at all these initiatives that they put forward that talks about Indigenous and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. But I have a different perspective on that, and I spoke up. I said, when you hired me, you included me. But what you're saying now is that something within the corporation has made me less than, that requires you to have a diversity and inclusion group that tries to make me equal again. And you can't make me feel included without changing the environment under which you welcome me in. And I think that was a real important perspective because, you know, as a gay Métis man, you know, they loved reporting on me, you know, in their CSR reports but they would do nothing to actually make a change within the organization. So it ended at reporting. And what I kind of looked at is that corporations do that with relationships. And, you know, so when a oil and gas company, for example, has the duty to consult, the way that they prove that they've talked with the First Nations, how many emails were sent, how many times that they've met face-to-face. And one of my good chief friends up at Fort Nelson First Nation, she said, while looking at a consultation report, she saw that she ran into somebody at the grocery store on the weekend, and that was included in the consultation report. And I mean, so what we have to do is look at building relationships like we would person to person, rather than, you know, what is required by the regulatory process. Now, I represent two traditionally marginalized groups of people, and I think that my presence within this industry makes people sometimes think about what they're saying, you know, and because I draw my strength from my spiritual background, which is from Siksika First Nation and a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, nobody can directly attack that. So I really feel that my presence, you know, is kind of fortified against those traditional aggressions.
So I found some incredible purpose in oil and gas, and I mean, we have a long way to go, but we've come a long way as well, where, you know, out of necessity, first of all, but then also, you know, acknowledging that perspectives like mine, being Indigenous and LGBT, is you know, a way that corporations can act with empathy in making their business decisions. You know, in understanding that, you know, the C-suite isn't the only way to think, and maybe you have to look to somebody else's eyes to see the true impact of what businesses are doing.
So much, Gregory. Next up, Jarret. As a founder of more than one organization, you've been creating space for increased Indigenous employment, especially in the tech industry. How do you hope to see the industry change? Jarret.
So I entered the technology space, the sector, about almost 3 years ago. And I came from the nonprofit world, mostly around advocacy in education and training. And I have experience working in some resource sectors. So, for example, nuclear energy, as well as working at the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business with industry there. And one of the things that I noticed was so how far advanced, for example, the education sector is in relation to Indigenous relations and understanding of Indigenous peoples within the context of their sector. And we know that there are issues, for example, with resource extraction, but Indigenous relations is a part of the business model for those sectors. And the work that has been done over the past 20 years, 25 years, for example, in some university cases, has been quite extensive. And I was on the Governor General's leadership tour in 2017, and I was placed in the Northwest Territories, and I saw a lot of that territory. And one of the things that I noticed in that space was there was a lack of Indigenous people in technology that became clear in that region, and then at Canada at large. And so I decided to transition my next role into technology, and still in training and starting in the nonprofit world. And I joined a firm called Troon Technologies, which is the group of companies. And one of the things that I quickly noticed in the technology space was zero representation almost of Indigenous people at all. And then also the technology sector itself in relation to diversity and inclusion around Indigenous people was, you know, behind, 20 years behind what other industries have been working on. It hasn't become apparent that it's not part of the main business model potentially for a lot of technology companies to include Indigenous people in their process. So, or their companies. So it hasn't been a priority. And I saw that reflected very strongly in the sector for the last 3 years. We have seen some movement happening in relation to women in technology, but what unfortunately happens is there's sort of like a ranking order of inclusion that becomes apparent in each sector. You know, obviously 51% of the population identifies as women, and so that seems to be the approach, you know, the diversity focus that they're going to work on first. Unfortunately, you know, Indigenous people, it, you know, kind of goes under visible minority, immigrants, and then newcomers, and then sort of Indigenous peoples is sort of near the bottom. And in the tech space, we see severely underrepresentation of Indigenous people. And that's just being Indigenous. That's not being Two-Spirited or LGBTQS in that space. And so building on our conversation from earlier where we talked about, we heard about, intersectionality of identities, as an Indigenous person and then as a Two-Spirited person, there wasn't much in the sector that I could find. And so it was important for me to create those spaces because they didn't exist. And I believe that in our future, our employment focus will be in the technology sector. And I want to have a organization that is there and ready and already actively promoting Indigenous peoples in career, Two-Spirited people's careers in technology. And one of the things that I learned from an elder on one of my Two-Spirited teachings was really the role of Two-Spirited people in our society prior to colonization. And one of the concepts that was shared with me was around in the Anishinaabe culture we have 5 genders. So a Two-Spirited person typically was the person that would mediate and work together to make sure that there was peace and harmony between genders, between the clans, and take on that hard work. And I think what we're seeing with my other panelists is all of us on this panel is that work being done. We are the people, the Two-Spirited people, that are the ones that are put forward to do this hard work because that was our role from an Anishinaabe perspective prior to colonization in history, from my understanding. And it was really interesting for me because I didn't come out, I identify as male, so he, him, a Two-Spirited man, and I didn't come out until I was 21, and I had already finished my degrees and my education by then. I was 22, I think, when I came out, and I'd already finished everything. And it was interesting was that what I studied in university was industrial relations and policy and law. And what that is mediation, collective bargaining, really areas that, Two-Spirited people historically were very strong in helping with the community. So I think that it's really encouraging to see other Two-Spirited people on the panel and hearing the work that we're doing and forging. The most important work that we have to do is bridging those gaps, and I think that we're the ones that historically have done that, and you're seeing that demonstrated today. And I think that's the role that I'm really have taken on in the tech space as well, and not just between Two-Spirited and other individuals, but also around Indigenous people in general in the technology space. We have federal government reports that identify 0 Inuit women in Canada involved in the tech industry. And, we all have issues with how collecting and data is reported, and we heard about that earlier from Gregory. But this is still a report that's signaling to the Inuit community that there is no representation in our sector, and there is Inuit women involved in technology, and so this is sort of the struggle where the tech sector is really positioned at the present moment, and so by creating Akawi Technologies, which is a private Indigenous software company, the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Technology, I'm trying to create those spaces to have these conversations and not be the only one having these conversations and doing this work.
Thank you so much, Jarret, for all of that insight. And then the question I have for Saylesh is, you've written about the importance of education, both in academia and community. What do you wish was taught in workplaces to make them truly inclusive spaces?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? You cut out.
Absolutely. So what do you wish was taught in workplaces to make them truly inclusive spaces to Two-Spirit people?
Oh, that's a huge question, right?
And I just wanted to let everybody know that I am in a school. I'm a teacher. So if you hear the bell go or if you hear the intercom come on, bear with me. I'll do the best I can to mute it when that happens. What do I wish? I guess I can't think about what I didn't have. I can't think about what I think I needed as someone who is trans and Indigenous. I never knew what it was like to have the right to speak or to have a voice or to be of any significance. So now all I can do is look forward and take the experience that I've gained as an educator, as an auntie, as an aspiring elder, and teach the children, which is, ironically what I do, right? And so I'm creating change as we do move forward. It's difficult to see what forward looks like given our, current circumstances with the COVID. The world, I think, will transform once this, runs its course. And so to see beyond that change, I don't know what that will look like or how it'll affect the world that we live in, because right now this transformation that's happening is very much revealing a lot of true character in across Turtle Island, around the world, with Indigenous issues, with Black Lives Matter, with everything, like even white supremacy. So these things are definitely very much on the horizon, and it's scary. It's exciting. I identify as a healer, so I truly call upon my warriors to help us, to protect us, while we create change and continue to wish for a world where we do have 2 feet to stand on, where we do have the right to step out of the margin and feel at home on our own traditional territories. I don't know that I can say, talk about what I wish. I think that all I can do is continue to act and to continue to be who I am and to continue to teach the future. It's the children, I think, that will make that change and that will make the world a little bit more kind and loving. I don't know if I answered your question or not. But I just speak from the heart and I hope I hit on something.
You definitely did, and I'm so grateful for that. So we're going to open it up to the audience now, and so there's already been quite a few folks who have posted in the Q&A. So I'm just going to pick a few questions that are really relevant to the topic from today. And since there's so many, I'm kind of just going to go at random. My goodness, I know where to start. Okay, so this is a question, I believe, for Jarret from Adrian Ishak. What's the best way or place to source Indigenous tech and sales talent? You're still muted.
Is that better? Yeah. It just takes a couple of minutes to turn on. Yeah, so there are several really great places to look. My previous employer where I used to work before, the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, has a directory that has actually quite a bit. There is actually some software, quite a bit of software companies that are located within there, and then the procurement program that they have. There is also regional chambers of commerce that can be used, and that have sort of the tech people, indigenous tech companies that are part of in that region. I do find that a lot of the procurement, a lot of the tech companies that we see that are indigenous owned and controlled typically are in sort of one small part of technology. So technology has like different areas. So you have like aerospace, pharma, medical. You have ICT, which is internet and communications technologies. You have aerospace. So there's other areas of technology, and a large majority of the companies, of indigenous companies that I've seen, reside in the ICT section, and mostly in design. So when you get into companies like mine, Kawi Technologies, for example, we're a blockchain firm, and we build software for a big pharma and also other governments around the world. So, I don't see as many of the details in the specific area that we're in. And a lot of it is word of mouth that is coming out. So we are seeing a huge level of technology companies, indigenous owned and controlled, increased, but that is actually part of the programming that we are looking to that we are going to be offering at the center at CIIT starting in January 2021 to increase that. And then we also have an ecosystem here in Toronto for tech founders, and we're part of what we call the Group of Seven, and we work through Dreammaker Ventures and Dreammaker Foundation. And what that is it's really incubator tech programs, entrepreneurship programs for underrepresented groups in seven main groups. And we work together in the tech sector to provide programming for individuals across all of our intersectionalities. And so there is an ecosystem being developed currently to increase indigenous tech companies in the space. But I would check out the larger ones like the Chamber of Commerce, like CCAB, or even the provinces, each and territories have procurement directories as they try to fulfill their procurement requirements with indigenous businesses, which is really part of a government mandate as well.
The next question, I'm going to direct it towards Saylesh. So this is from Rob Goatsey. I apologize if I mispronounce any of the participants' names. So this question asks, have you involved Two-Spirit elders in helping educate others in your workplace, or how could folks here today involve Two-Spirit people or elders in their workplace?
Oh, goodness. I wish I could say that I have, but as it stands, because, like I say, I'm one of the first generations to sort of come back, I feel like a Two-Spirit ancestor that's returned. So before my time, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm certain there were others like myself. I only had one Two-Spirit elder in my family, and unfortunately she didn't live to see her journey through. And I'm certain it was very much related to her gender and sexuality. However, I do the best that I can to channel, if that makes any sense. And I do the best that I can to evoke my inner elder as much as I can. And it sounds weird for me to speak like this because I'm taught from my own elders that we're supposed to be humble and we're not supposed to talk about ourselves in a way that might sound like we're bragging, and that's not my intention. And I'm speaking specifically to my own territory, the Stalo people. It is unfortunate, I guess, and it's also a privilege at the same time that I'm it. So my own people who have started to come out and to transition or whatever that means, they look to me, and it's a real honor. It's a real responsibility, and I'm certain, like I said, and I don't mean to miss anyone who might not be necessarily out, because I know that they're there. I know that there are a lot of elders who, and rightfully so, are afraid to be who they are, and they have to hide and they have to remain in the margins because they're afraid. That's all they've ever known. I understand it. I continue to reconcile with my fear and to do the best that I can to believe in something divine that's going to continue moving with me and for me. And so that, I can be a great medium that our future generations need, so that they hear the things that I think I needed to hear. They experience the things that I feel I didn't get to experience. But it's quite a, like I say, it's quite a lofty thing to be the go-to. I get called, auntie or granny, or like they, my own young people, they tease me like that, but they're actually honoring me. So we do the best we can. I call my grandmother, I call my mother, I call any of my uncles and aunties to help me. But when it comes to specific Two-Spirit issues or education, it's on me at this point. But if I find elders, I will use them the best that I can.
Saylesh. And so the last question we're going to pull from the audience is from David G. I'm going to direct this to Gregory. So David G asks, and you already spoke a little bit about this, Gregory, so I thought this would be good for you. So what are some actionable, tangible steps organizations can take to be more inclusive of the Two-Spirit community, like hiring practices, content, subject matter, things like that? So take it away.
So I think this builds on some of the conversation I had around corporate social responsibility and the role of the corporation to change the environment, and not just policy. I think policy is cheap. I think it needs to be actioned by and lived by every single manager and higher up in the corporation, and not just be championed by one single person in the C-suite. I think that's cheap. I think, in order to have a place of inclusion, you need to show that from the CEO to, junior managers, that they understand the role and value that diverse perspectives bring an organization. They need to tell the organization what they believe the value is of diversity from their own words and their own stories, and allow them to speak from their own journey of a time that somebody from a diverse background changed the way they thought. And I think that's true leadership, when you're able to empathize with an experience under which you've changed your practice. I think that's what corporations need to do, to look at validating and raising up the profile of diversity within organizations. It doesn't just start with, it starts with policy, but it needs to go from top down. I know that's said so many times, but I haven't seen an organization that has truly done that yet. We're on the way, but I think what people love to hear is themselves in other people's stories. And I think that is the most powerful form of validation and inclusion anybody can show towards somebody else.
Thank you so much. And just briefly, if the three of you could just have just a final closing, what you hope the future looks like for Two-Spirit people and Indigenous LGBTQ plus people in the workplace. And we'll start with Saylesh. We'll go backwards.
Sorry, I'm having mic issues. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Oh, goodness. I hope for the world. I hope for a time and place and space where people are just people. I hope for a time and place and space where our Two-Spirit, trans, Indigenous children and youth and upcoming elders are celebrated and embraced. You know, like I used to think, you know, I'm not the stereotype or I'm not the cliche. I'm two-spirited and so therefore I'm a healer and I'm a weaver and I'm a master with children and I understand both worlds and, you know, all of those things that I've come to move through since my transition and since my journey began in the mid-90s. However, I am so happy to say that I've become the cliche. And I hope that the world continues to feast, hold ceremony, and help our young people to not just heal through their own coming out or their own transitions, but to give them a place and a voice where they feel like they've never been in a margin. I'm dreaming big. I don't know. I mean, all I can do is continue to pray and to continue to dwell and to sing and love and teach. So I don't know. It's a lofty question, but I just that's what I would like to hope for is everything.
Thank you. I'm right there with you. I'm right. What about you, Jarret? What are your hopes for the future for us?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about the future, I think of our two-spirited teachings being maintained and shared with those that need them, and not get to the point where that unique perspective that we provide is sort of glossed over or part of a bigger pie, because there is a uniqueness to the way we think. I consider myself an innovator and in the tech space and in general. And I attribute a lot of that to the way that I think and to the teachings that I learned. I grew up, I consider myself very privileged, and even in the Indigenous, in the two-spirited space. And I had the luxury of going to university to, work with elders that were along my journey for my undergrad and through my master's, and have them as teachers and guidance and ask them for guidance. And I also grew up in the Greater Toronto region, in high school in a performing arts setting where, what I grew up with was a lot of privilege. Even in 2001 and 2002, it was the time where I wasn't typically really bullied that much in school. And I think that in the future, I would like to have more two-spirited people having my experience, but making sure that that our two-spirited teachings are maintained and promoted appropriately for those that need them. Because I had that privilege growing up and still maintain that privilege, I have been able to participate in panels like this, be able to talk about the work that I'm doing, and Saylesh, you talk about, and I agree with it, around try not to brag. It's a big thing in the community, but I have to to do that work in order to signal to other two-spirited youth and people that there is a place for us and that somebody's forging that path, and all of us on this panel are forging that path, and all of us in our community are to this day. And I think that I would like to see in the future more people at a younger age like me understanding the identity, having the opportunity to learn and grow and work with two-spirited people to understand that, because that was a privilege that I had all through my university career journey, and it has really given me the space to expand the knowledge of anybody around the experience that we have, and so that's what I would like for the future.
It's really beautiful. Thanks, Jarret. And what about you, Gregory? What does it look like years and years from now?
So colonization has made us fear the things that we don't know. No, colonization has made us fear what the colonizers don't know. And that has translated into us abandoning the traditional purpose and the traditional standing of two-spirited people within our own communities. I'm 34 years old, and I still feel like I come out a million different times to every single person that I meet. And I always have this moment of pause and fear of what could happen if this is the wrong person. And that occurs every single day. And so while, you know, I came out to a loving and supportive family when I was like 14, that colonial fear is implanted within me and expresses itself every single day. And if there's one thing that the future looks like, is that we reclaim that fear and turn it into pride. And I think that, for me, is what I hope that our youth grow up with, is the pride of owning multiple perspectives and empathy towards others. And that, you know, even though I might not agree, I understand. And if I don't understand, I listen. And I think that that's the teachings that I really believe are at the core of what the workplace needs to look like. And so that another generation doesn't have to walk through a building wondering who they have to be for somebody else.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor moderating for the three of you. I have learned so much. I feel so blessed with the teachings that you have shared. I'm sure everyone here in this, as attendees echoes my sentiments, and we'll now pass things back over to Jade with some closing comments. She may question to all of you. Thank you.
There we go. Mcleod, to all of our panelists, that was an absolutely amazing presentation and discussion. I know that a lot of people in the chat are saying how much they learned, how much they're inspired, and I hope that includes being inspired to action, to kind of help create these visions that all of you have shared with us of a future that, you know, honors the elders, honors tradition, but also brings space and economic development to Indigenous communities and to Two-Spirit people. And so I'm so grateful, Gregory, Jarret, and Saylesh, that you were able to join us on this panel. Gabe, for moderating the panel. It's always a pleasure to work with you. as well as those who gave remarks, including Albert Mcleod, Kelly Lendsay, and Patricia Baxter. I'm so grateful to work with all of you and to Indigenous Works in working with us on this event. We did provide, do have some resources for you here to learn more about the work that Two-Spirit people are doing, including the Two-Spirits of Motion Foundation, a Two-Spirit journal, which has actually quite rich commentary about experiences of Two-Spirit people under COVID, as well as the Two-Spirit archives that is at the University of Winnipeg and includes Albert Mcleod's collection that he has provided. Also, please do check out Indigenous Works, including their Inclusion Continuum, and feel free to download this resource today so you can get all these links and access them. We are so grateful for the support, of course, of Bell in this event. Without Bell's support, we wouldn't be able to have the event as we have. And so if you feel open to it, we have a poll about how you learned about this event before we go. Oh, and you're already filling that. Perfect. So I'm so grateful that all of you have joined us today. This will be recorded and you will receive a copy of the presentation, as well as please join us for future ProPrides. So on July 8th, we will be working with the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum on LGBTQ 2+ inclusion in the skilled trades. On July 22nd, we'll be working with the Conference Board of Canada to queer the future of work. And on August 12th, we'll be working with Youth Fusion for a French language ProPride on Generation Z, queer and trans on the job. We are so grateful to all of you who have joined us today, Miigwech, and I hope this is the start of more work in all of our organizations.